Puppy from Puppy's Toy Box Whips on Etsy. Link's going to be down in the description. Now, one of the last things that I want to say in this series of ways of immediately telling what's going to be a good quality whip and what's going to be a poor quality whip when you're looking online. And so we've talked about, what kind of edge beveling that they use. That's going to be an important tell, and it's going to be one of those things that you don't need to know anything about whips to go, oh, that's a crap whip because they don't bevel their edges. And we've discussed the importance of that. We also discussed a little bit about what the core is made out of, that you want to have something that's going to transfer energy, because that's what whips are all about, is transferring energy down. Now we're going to talk about the types of leather that's being used in a whip. And if you talk to any real enthusiast about whips, somebody that does a lot of sports cracking, or they do a lot of that have a large collection, they've got these 8-foot bull whips that cost them $1,000, whatever, they're gonna tell you that Kangaroo is it all the time. And so here's the thing, is that this is my personal whip. This is a 8-foot Kangaroo whip. I put a 12-inch handle into it. And the thing about Kangaroo is that Kangaroo is going to start off about 2 to 3 ounces. Sometimes you'll get it up to 4 ounces, which is the thickness of the leather. And as we discussed in a prior video, that the thickness of the leather is going to determine how much space, when a lace goes over another one, that the leather is allowing for. And so Kangaroo, being so incredibly thin and still incredibly strong, we don't have to have any space between laces, or very little. So I can actually get a very rigid product very, very easily. The laces, when I'm plaiting with Kangaroo, are not going to break on me. And that's a big deal, because the more that laces break on me, the more I have to tuck them under and tie them to the belly, and sometimes have to cheat in new laces, things like that. So if I'm going with a really weaker leather, I have to make more repairs as I'm making the whip, which is going to add sometimes gaps in the whip. Sometimes it's going to make the little bulges. There can be problems with that. And then, I've gotten really good at hiding that kind of thing now, but it's something that doesn't happen nearly as much. It does happen with Kangaroo, but not nearly as much. So you can actually get a much better product a lot easier with Kangaroo. And so that's why it's so popular. But the thing is Kangaroo a lot of times can be about $70 per hide. And for a 3 or 4 foot whip, you're going to be using 2 hides. That's $140. And so, a lot of times when I see a whip that's Kangaroo, and they say that it's Kangaroo, and then, they're charging $140 for a 4-foot snake whip, I'm going, what are you doing there? Because that barely covers the cost of the leather. So, and, I'm going to be putting 20 hours into this. So, they may be putting in such a large lead shot bag in there. They may be using a different leather for the bolsters, other ways of getting that thickness there, and they're just using the Kangaroo for the overlay. That's a possibility. So, if you're going to be getting a Kangaroo whip, be prepared to pay a Kangaroo price. If you go to David Morgan's site, you're going to be paying over $1,000 for most of his whips. Sometimes you can get them around the $800 range there. So that's kind of the spiel on Kangaroo. Now, the next most common one is going to be nylon paracord, which comes in very pretty colors. It doesn't break. When you're pulling the laces, it does not break. It comes in a single thickness, so when you're dropping laces, it's going to make it more likely that you're going to have bulges. It's going to be more likely that you're going to have gaps and that type of thing. So getting a nice, even product is going to be harder to do. And the other thing is that it doesn't really break in the same way, and it has no weight to it. So most nylon paracord whips that you're going to find are going to be lead shot loaded. I'll rephrase that. Sometimes they'll use BBs as well, which again, BBs are going to be very thick. You're not going to be able to get them as fine as you can get lead shot. And so when you fill up the shot bag, it can be more prone to being lumpy. You can't bind it as easily. And so whatever you end up with is what you end up with, and it can shift, and then that can destroy your whip over time. So that being said, I can get the same rigidity here. I don't tend to do paracord very often. I do it every once in a while to remind myself why I don't do paracord, and that's because I'll spend like an hour or two working on it, and I'll get blisters on my hands, and they'll be bloody, and it'll be gross, and I just don't like working with it for that very reason. And head knots are a pain in the ass with it, so I don't tend to do much paracord. I will if somebody asks me, but I might actually charge you more because I hate it so much. So the next more common one is going to be kind of latigo. So the problem with latigo is that it's going to be, you can't really skive it down or split it down beyond 5.5 ounces or so. Sometimes you can get away with, if it's a really good latigo, you can get away with it being 4 ounces, but you're not going to be able to get it as thin, which means that there's going to be more humps for it to be going over, which is going to make it looser. You're not going to be able to get as stiff. But I find it works really incredibly well for cores. It's my favorite way of doing cores. It's not much of a hassle. It tends to be pretty strong for the most part, as long as I stay above 4.5 ounce. The problem with it, okay, it's thicker, so if you have to drop a lace, it's going to be harder to hide. It's going to be harder to attach to the core and all that. But it can make a pretty decent whip. Again, if we look back in history, when we look at very old traditional Australian whips, is going to be made of red hide, which is going to be a different tanning process, but it's going to be almost exactly the same thing. It's just going to have a red tint because of the tanning process. Americans, we would use latigo all the time for our whips, and I have made snake whips out of it. But the thing is that the length of your hide is going to determine, how much leather you can go and how long your whip can be. And that's the thing with kangaroos, I can actually cut around in a circle, and so I can have an infinite number of an infinite length in my whips, whereas with latigo I'm actually pretty limited on that. So latigo, I do recommend it, especially for short whips. This is a welting ball. It hurts just as much as if it was made out of kangaroo, and it throws really well. It's going to last forever. I forgot to bring it out, but it's around here somewhere. The first whip second whip I ever made, which I made with my instructor, was made out of kangaroo, or made out of latigo. Whenever I do scenes, because it's going to be very similar to these guys, it's my go-to whip because it's very easy to use in tight spaces. I can move fast with it, and I've had that whip for about 12-13 years now, and I use it probably once or twice a month. So latigo, it lasts forever. So I really like it. I like the way that it braids down. It does have its drawbacks, but it does for BDSM whips. It's great, and it's common. It's common and it's cheap. So you're going to be paying, sometimes $40 to $110 for a very decent latigo whip that's going to last you forever. So the next one that I tend to use, this guy right here, is 24-inch. This is has some calf skin on the top and calf skin bolsters. So this is a veg tan, bark tanned leather, which is the same type of tanning process that you'll find with most kangaroo out there. So the thing is that latigo, I find, if I were not to add bolsters, if I were just to do a very simple whip, latigo kind of fizzles out at about that 24-inch mark, at least for play whips. It kind of gains a little bit more back when you start going to 3-foot range, but in that kind of like above 18 to 24 range, it doesn't really work as well. So that's why I have a calf overlay whip for people who want a little bit more power behind the whip. And that's the thing about the 18-incher, is it doesn't have as much power. It's enough to do most things with most bottoms. But so this guy throws incredibly well. Moves exactly the same way as kangaroo does. This comes in about 3 to 5 ounce, so it's I use 3 to 5 ounce. It actually comes a lot thicker because they'll start going into tooling hides and whatnot with it. But this leather is stronger than a lot of leathers out there. It's incredibly strong for its thickness. It's stronger for its thickness than latigo is. I can dye it. I can do a lot of things. It gets a little creaky, but it's a pretty remarkable leather. It functions very similar. Thing is that I can't get the laces to the same width as I can with Kangaroo. I can get, I think, Kangaroo down to about 3 millimeters and it won't break. Whereas this, I'm going to be looking at about a 1/4 inch. So there's going to be, this is going to be wider before it starts breaking a lot on me. So I'm not going to be able to get it to taper down as much as I can with Kangaroo. So for a mid-grade whip, a veg tanned calf can make a very, very fine whip. So the next thing I want to talk about is sometimes you'll see some whips will be made out of upholstery hide. I don't have any that I can show you because I don't want to spend my money on it. But let's talk about that. For one, is that this whip or this flogger, this fall can stretch more than the veg tan. The veg tan doesn't stretch at all. Latigo barely stretches at all. Kangaroo doesn't stretch at all. This stretches, and that's going to lead to weakness and in the laces, and it's going to lead to looseness within the whip. And a lot of times people who are using an upholstery type hide or garment type hide for the whips, they're not pulling it tight anyway, so you're going to end up with a very limp, lifeless whip. Now, if we think about also this underbelly here, this is a lot of friction. So even if I try to pull it tight, it's gonna fight me a lot more than Kangaroo is, or veg tan or Latigo, because all three of those are going to have a very are going to slip into place very, very easily and stay there. And which brings me kind of to my last type of leather that I've seen, which is the worst that you can possibly go with, and that is with suede. So if you think about what I just said, that underbelly there with suede, it's basically like that fluffy underbelly on both sides, and it's not a particularly strong leather to begin with. So, and also if you use braiding soap, which is what's going to allow you to get that lace tight, you go with suede, and it's going to get ruined. The quality of the suede is going to be ruined if you use that braiding soap. So you're not using braiding soap to begin with, and you have that extra friction on both sides. And a lot of times when you look at those whips, the laces are, almost a 1/2 inch all the way down. Where does the taper come from in a whip? Well, if you look at this Kangaroo whip, this is about, I want to say between 1/4 and 3/8 at the very top. We look at the bottom. That's very, very fine. It's not even getting picked up that there are multiple laces in there on the camera, but you can see the sides of the lace actually tapers all the way down. You can actually see that probably pretty well here on this guy. You've got about a 1/2 inch at the top. You've got about a 1/4 inch in the bottom. So the type of leather that you use, it has to taper down. It has to change its shape, and you want to have it with as little friction as you possibly can, and that's what's going to determine the quality of the whip as far as the type of material that's used for. If you have any further questions, go ahead and put it down in the comments below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you. Bye.